What's going on? It's Chris and Will, and you know what day it is. It's Feature Friday over here at LifterLMS. Today's going to be an awesome demo and conversation for you around the LifterLMS REST API, which is an awesome feature of LifterLMS. If you don't know what a REST API is, we're going to go over that at a high level. So if you're a non-technical or non-developer user, stay with us. You're going to get some great ideas of possibilities you can do with your website. If you are a developer and or WordPress professional agency owner, take a look at what we're going to show you today so that you can add even more value to your clients and create even more customizable learning platforms online. Over to you, Will.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, I've been looking into the LifterLMS REST API here in the last week, and before this week, I was afraid of the REST API. I would look at this page here on screen, this API documentation. I would kind of scroll through it, and I might not understand what's going on. If I just click through to the courses area, I would see something like this, and I'd be completely intimidated. I'd run away from it, and I'd be like, this isn't for me. But recently, I've been cutting into it a little bit more and trying to understand what's going on. And from this demo we'll do today, it'll help clear a lot up for, like you said, users who are not technical, but also for technical users to become more aware of what you can do with LifterLMS. Like LifterLMS is a plugin for WordPress that lets you create courses and memberships and quizzes and payments and all kinds of awesome things in WordPress, but it also has an underlying API that can be used to do even more features if you have a technical oriented person on your team, or you could enlist someone technical from maybe the LifterLMS experts page to help out a little bit with your site to achieve some more advanced learning goals than we thought were possible with just WordPress and the plugins out of the box. So the first thing I want to cover is how you can get access to the LifterLMS REST API within your WordPress website. So under LifterLMS settings, REST API, there's a tab up here called REST API. So this is where you can get API keys for your website. So if you're building a custom application, or you're building a custom plugin, or you have a developer on your team who'd like to work with a REST API, this is where they'll be able to get the authentication data for their application. When you generate API keys, so if I'm making a custom application, Will's custom reporting application, I might want to generate some API keys that can read and write to my website. I'm going to save, and it's going to give me a couple of API keys here. I'll revoke these API keys so they can't actually be used on my website. But we can use these consumer keys and consumer secret keys in order to tell the website that our custom application has access to read and write certain information. And so what information would that be? If we
Real
visit
quick,
the REST API,
let me jump in and just ask. I think people are used to using API keys for like Stripe and PayPal, or with MailChimp or ActiveCampaign, a CRM.
Yeah.
Maybe explain like what's actually happening from like an e-commerce perspective when somebody puts in their Stripe API keys to accept money from their LifterLMS website.
Right. Yeah. So we have our personal computers that are interacting with our website servers. They're talking back and forth and sending data between each other, but computers can also talk to each other. Like you could have your WordPress server talking to Stripe and sending data back and forth. And so the API key is how you facilitate that transaction. It's kind of like the password handshake thing they have in order to validate that yes, this request does have access to charge this customer. This it just kind of is a validation method, sort of a password that allows them to handshake with each other and interface. Does that kind of help explain kind of how API keys work? So you might have a Stripe API key that's in your WordPress website that your WordPress website will use to let Stripe know that it does have permission to be interacting with this account.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome. And in depth as to what that can do, you'd find in the API documentation, now that we have proven to the server that we do have access to read and write data, what data are we going to try to read and write? That's where the API documentation is super helpful to figure out exactly what you can do with any given API. And the LifterLMS REST API, I zoomed in too far, is documented super well. So we have a nice introduction up here at the top if you're new to APIs and understanding what they do as a developer. We have some great introductions and tools that might be useful when making sure your requests are working and everything. But What we might want to do with a REST API would be put students on our website. If we're building a custom application that registers students, or maybe we have like a corporate training example is something I've seen a lot, where the corporation has an internal system they've developed where they manage their users, and then they want to put their users inside LifterLMS, in their LifterLMS install, and they would use the REST API to do that. If I search in the search bar here to narrow it down, we could post student enrollments and get student enrollments. So we can create student enrollments on the website from our custom application by using these API requests. So we would get our API credentials from our LifterLMS settings, put them in our custom application to prove to the website that we do have permission to create and edit students, and then we would use our documentation here in order to format. If I go down to an example request here, we might format that API request in order to create a student on our website. And so this would require someone who's a little bit more technical. If you have someone on your team who's PHP friendly, or you could visit lifterlms.com/experts. But I think non-technical users will get a lot of value out of reading through the REST API and just seeing what's possible. We could create a course with the REST API. We could create a student with the REST API. We could retrieve student reporting data from the REST API. So if you wanted to create a custom application that pulled reporting data and then structured it a little bit differently in a different looking table, you might be able to have a custom developer do that by using the Lifter REST API. And it's a super accessible thing in the LifterLMS settings to get the credentials that your application would need to pull the data, some of the restricted data like student enrollments and progress and things that you'd have to be authenticated in order to get this data from the website. But also developers who are building third-party integrations might want to take the student ID of the user and then pass it to their application, and then eventually pass the data back if maybe it's like a learning record store kind of system where you're offloading your reporting and then sending the data back into WordPress to validate that a user has completed something off-site. You might be able to put something like that together with the REST API. But there's a lot of potential here. And so, Chris, do you have any like specific ideas or questions that a user might have that we might be able to put together with the REST API, or any questions from what I've said so far?
Let's just tell us more about what might be possible with developing a custom reporting solution, particularly for internal training, or if somebody's building a course marketplace like Udemy with LifterLMS and WordPress, and they want like just this separate reporting application that they could, make their instructors have their own dashboard or something like that. Like what are some more use cases in the reporting niche?
Yeah, that's a really great use case. The Udemy for LifterLMS use case, or the course marketplace, where we want to design an interface that allows us to create courses and lessons and quizzes and manage our reporting, but on the front end of WordPress. So if we're building a plugin or even a third-party application, but let's just say it's a WordPress plugin, we could use the API in order to create those courses. So we would have like a form that's created within our custom plugin that says, enter your text here, and this text is going to become the course title. If I go to courses here, we would fill out, if we're going to create a course with the post option, we would need a title, and that would come from our form, and we would specify that in our API request, like this field is going to represent the title of the course, and then this field is going to represent maybe the course content and the access plan price. We would go through the API and formulate a very specific request to post a course, but we could create like a form on the front end of the website that is super nicely laid out, and then uses the REST API to send that data and create a course post type from there. And then as far as reporting goes, we could pull students reporting from that specific course and then display that reporting in our custom application on the front end. And in this case, we're talking about maybe a WordPress plugin would be our custom application, but it could even be sent to a third party if you wanted it to be hosted somewhere else. But that's the Udemy example, and some interesting uses of the REST API in that case. Does that kind of make sense, or is there some more questions there?
That does. And one more question, like WordPress itself has a REST API. Can you kind of explain how to think about that?
Yeah. So WordPress itself has a pretty robust REST API. Let me see if I can find it. I think this is the REST API handbook, and we modeled ours pretty closely after. So this is like the intro to the REST API, but I want to see the REST API docs. REST API resources. Okay, cool. So we could look at the WordPress REST API, and it looks a little bit different than the Lifter API, but it's functionally a very similar thing with how we would maybe create a user in WordPress. I'm trying to think of what we would use the basic WordPress user REST API for. We could create a WordPress user, we could create a blog post on the website. The WordPress basic REST API is going to explain how you could do things with the WordPress core out of the box. And I wonder, I haven't explored the REST API in WordPress too deeply, but there might be some options even for plugins and stuff. But we could update users, we could update user profile links, user meta fields, and all that kind of stuff. And the Lifter REST API describes what you can do specifically with a LifterLMS website. So if you were using just a general WordPress website, the WordPress REST API and those resources would help you to figure out, like, what can we send to this website, what data can we create on the website or pull from the website with WordPress out of the box. But like Lifter is going to add course post types, lesson post types, it's going to add like quizzes and reporting, and so it adds more in-depth features. So that's why we developed the REST API documentation, in order to help explain to custom developers how they could interact with our custom features, because it's a little bit confusing. You'd have to read through the whole code in order to figure some of these things out. So the API makes it super useful and much simpler of a process to build an integration with LifterLMS specifically. So the API documentation isn't anything technical in itself. It just describes how you could interact with the LifterLMS system and send data to it, get data from it. And then the WordPress REST API would be just interacting with general WordPress posts and everything.
That's awesome. And that's it for this episode of Feature Friday. There's links below this video to the LifterLMS REST API documentation. If you're non-technical, just think back to the time when you were first learning WordPress and you started opening up possibilities as you got more familiar with its capabilities. This is the same thing. Look at it, even if you don't understand it. And there's a link below to the LifterLMS experts. So if you do want something custom built, we have a whole list of people that can help you with that. So check that out. That's one of the things that makes LifterLMS and WordPress the most customizable platform, so that you can really do anything in the kind of open source spirit of what we do. That's it for this episode of Feature Friday. I'm Chris from LifterLMS. We've got Will Middleton, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.